Hello and welcome to my channel. I am Marlies and last video I spoke Dutch. In this video I'm gonna try and speak English. I hope I'm doing alright. If I do make any weird mistakes, please let me know in the comments so I can try and improve. So today I'm gonna draw a cute little dragon who hid in my handbag and who's now coming out. So I'm gonna focus mainly on two things. The first thing I'm gonna focus on is the design part of the dragon. Because my handbag, I just used my own old handbag for reference, so that was pretty easy, I could just copy it. But for the dragon I didn't really have any reference, so I had to design it myself. And in the first part of the video I'm gonna show the design process of the dragon, the sketches I made, and kind of tell you my thoughts on it. Then in the second part of the video, I'd like to focus on drawing the scales on the back and the tail of the dragon. And I'm gonna do this in real time so I can really tell you what's going on. You can follow along maybe and just get a good look at it. And well, then I think I'm gonna speed up other parts of the video, so I hope that's okay. So without further ado, which I kind of stole from other YouTubers, so I hope that's okay too. Let's draw! Okay, so while I start shading the back in the background, I would like to show some sketches of the dragon. After the idea of drawing this dragon back thing came up in my head, I was looking at dragon pictures on the internet, just to get some inspiration and to remind myself how dragons look exactly again. Now I did draw a dragon in the past, which was this dragon, but that was years ago and I drew it in Photoshop rather than with color pencils. So while I was looking at those dragons on my screen, I actually received a phone call, and that took quite a while, and while on the phone I started making some doodles with pen on the notepaper I just accidentally had in front of me. And well, as you can see, the first dragon actually looked more like some sort of a horse, but then the second one was not even that bad, though I found it a little too cute. And I really wanted my dragon to look a little more naughty or feisty or whatever the word is. So then that evening I started making a sketch with graphite pencil, figuring out how exactly the main shape and posture of the dragon should be, and I tried some things with the horns and the scales and experimenting a bit with the direction of the light, and eventually when I was happy with how it looked, I made yet another sketch, but this time with color pencil, just trying some colors and shapes again. Now at that point I was quite sure about how the dragon should look, but I was still unsure about its exact size in comparison with the bag. So I made a photo of both the bag and the sketch of the dragon, opened them both in Photoshop and combined them, trying several sizes for the dragon until I thought it was exactly the right size. And then I made the final line drawing on A3 paper using a raster for more accuracy. By the way, for this drawing I used Canson Bristol paper, and this was actually the first time I used that paper and I'm really happy with it. In my last video I used paper that was rather grainy and I found it very difficult to get a good result, but with this paper it's just so smooth. There's barely any graininess and I wish I had tried this paper sooner, so I can really recommend it if you're working with color pencils. Try this Bristol paper. I think there's different brands of it. I don't really know the difference, but it isn't that expensive and I really love it. So at this point the bag is finished. That was pretty quick. It did take much longer in real time, and I'm now starting with the eyes, face and horns of the dragon. Now, I did not want to cut that out from the video entirely because you might find it interesting, so I'll speed it up a little and maybe throw in some music, and then I'll slow it back down again when I start working on the scales. So as you can see, I already started working on the outlines of the scales. When I start working on the tail, I will slow the video down and tell you exactly what I'm doing there. Now for the scales, I actually did use some reference, which I didn't copy exactly, but I used them merely to get an idea of how those pointy scales look like from different angles and how the shadows and structures look like. So there is this lizard which almost looks like a little dragon, and it's called a Cordylus giganteus, or well, it does have a regular name too. It's a giant girdled lizard, and this lizard has really cool pointy scales, and it isn't giant at all because apparently it can more or less fit in your hand. But anyway, that's the lizard whose scales I used for reference. So I already drew the outlines of the scales earlier on in the video, which is just basically drawing with a black pencil and drawing the lines. And now I'm going in with a dark brown pencil and I start shading the inside of the scales. And the inside of the scales is a sort of combination of shadow and a darker color because the scales are yellowish on the outside, but they're also lighter on the outside because more light is falling on them. So the inside of the scale should be rather dark, and I'm shading them very carefully. I'm not putting a lot of pressure on yet. I will do that later on. So I just cautiously start shading the scales, making gradients from the inside to the outside. And I take note that the scales should all look more or less different, because in nature you don't have exact copies and things are never exactly the same. So I try to really make sure that all the scales are a little different. Either they point a little in a different direction, or they're a little darker, or the shape of the shading in the middle is just different from the one before. So I work my way down the tail, scale after scale, and you have to be patient with this. I'm trying to shade as close to the lines as I can, and you can see I also shade the scales on the outside of the tail, just working very slowly, not putting a lot of pressure, and just coloring in the inside of all the scales. And it doesn't have to be too dark yet, we will put more layers on it later on. So I just do it very lightly, just to get an idea for myself where the color should be. And at this point I'm shading the tip of the tail, which doesn't have any scales, so it's more smooth, and it's just a matter of trying to shade it in a little smooth with very, very little pressure on the pencil. And I think I will blend the tip of the tail a little because it is so lightly smoothed, but with so lightly shaded, but with a very dark pencil. So as you can see, I have this paper blender thing, and it makes it just a little smoother. So then I'm going back in to the scales, working on the shadows again, and it almost seems like I'm adding harder outlines, but that's not entirely true because the scales are not connected to the skin or the smaller scales below. They're a little above that, so there's always shadow underneath them, and that's what causes the dark lines on the outside of the scales. So as you can see, I'm now adding those shadows to the scales on the side. There's actually 3 rows of scales, one large middle row, and then a smaller row to the left and a smaller row to the right. And that's the way the tail is built up. So now I'm going in with a black, and I'm not using a very soft black. This is actually a Derwent Pro color, I think, and they are quite hard. And I really keep my pencil extremely sharp at this point, because now I want to do the shadows in between the scales. And these shadows are only very small. It's very thin lines, and it looks like outlines now, but it's really the shadows. And I'm just working my way down the tail. I start with rather large scales at the base of the tail. It's almost a bit like maybe crocodile scales, and then when I go down the tail, the scales get smaller and smaller, and I just lightly put in some wiggly lines, trying to get them as dark as possible with a very sharp tip, and keeping a little wiggly hand, so they're not too straight. They should be a little natural, a little wiggly. That's how scales look like in real life, of course. And then I'm doing the other side of the tail, which is only a very, very small part, so it's only a few little lines. And now I'm going back in with the brown, and I'm going to shade the inside of the smaller scales. And as you can see, with these large scales, I try to make the inside a little darker, so you get this sort of dented effect, so that the outer part of the scales are bent up a little, and they are gonna be lighter brown, yellowish, and the inside of the scales is going to be a little darker, and this gives a nice effect. It's nice that the scales don't have one uniform color, but there's some sort of variation both between the scales but also on the scales itself. So again, I work my way down the tail. I give some more body to the shadows in between the scales, and I'm just shading all the scales at this point one by one. And I keep my pencil very sharp again. So at this point the scales are getting really small, and then it might be better to stop shading the individual scales, but just shade them all together like I'm doing in here. And don't forget to keep a highlight in, because the tail's probably a little shiny. So if you shade the entire tail now, there's no way back. So I'm adding a little more shadow over here and where the tail touches the back, because there's natural shadows, of course, and the tail is bent here pretty much, so there's some extra shadow too. And then on the other side of the tail, I more or less do the same thing, except for that it's only just a little part, and there's probably a little more light falling on that, so it doesn't have to be too dark. And again, I'm going in with the dark brown, making everything just a little darker. And I make sure to keep out some highlights, which I don't shade. So now I'm going in with yellow, and this is what makes the tail come to life a little, and I'm going to shade all over it except for the very dark parts. But the highlights I left out before, those are the spots that I'm shading in now. So the right side of the tail, where I didn't add many shadows, it's going to be more yellow, and the left side it's more like a gold, bronze, brown sort of look. I'm also adding a shadow to this side of the tail and just blending with my finger, which you actually shouldn't do because you can bring all the grease from your skin on the paper. But apparently I was too lazy to get my paper blender. And now I'm going in with black again, but this is not the Derwent black. This is a Caran d'Ache black from the Luminance series. And this pencil is a little softer and creamier, and it has this real deep, rich black color. So you can create really deep shadows, but it's a little softer, so you have to keep it really sharp, and you have to sharpen it a lot actually. And with this color I'm gonna add some more shadow, and I'm also gonna add the shadow in between the little scales. So I'm drawing all these tiny little lines, and I'm drawing the shadow around the bigger scales. So again, I'm actually doing the same as I did before when I first drew the shadows. I'm just doing it again, but darker, and I'm putting a little more pressure on now. I'm also making the shadows around the big scales a little bigger and a little darker. And as you can see at this point, the tail is really popping out. It's starting to pop out. It's coming to life, and it's at least this part of the tail is starting to look a little real, a little 3D. And that's the effect we're looking for, so that's good. So I'm going in with a lighter brown color, and I'm gonna add some more shading to the big scales. And I'm gonna put a little more pressure on it now, especially in the middle parts. I am putting a lot more pressure. I'm also using my eraser to erase some of the black lines on the highlight side of the tail, because there aren't any shadows there, so I might as well erase them. This is, by the way, a eraser pencil, which is a eraser which is in a pencil, so that's pretty convenient if you have to erase tiny small parts. I really love that pencil. So I'm going on with the light brown pencil, and I work my way down the tail again, scale after scale, putting a lot of pressure at the darker base part of the scales now, and still putting light pressure on the edges of the scale, because I want some more other colors over there. The smaller scales, and you can see I'm losing a little dead now on the right side of the tail, but I will fix that later. But the left side of the tail is now coming together, and it's really starting to look like something. So scale after scale, you shouldn't be impatient when you're working on scales, because there's just so many scales and you have to shade them all. So at this point they're all done with the light brown color. And I'm using my pencil eraser again to add some more highlights. And just making small fixes. And now I think I'm going in with black again, and this time it's the Durban black again, the sharp hard black. And I'm gonna add more shadows, because when I added light brown, the depth of the shadows was lost a little, so I have to re-add that and really make it pop out again, because it was starting to look flat, because the values were a little too close together. And as you can see now, by adding all these shadows again, it's starting to pop out again, so it's now really colorful and popping out. There's a cool 3D effect. I'm adding shadows around the tip of the tail, or at least the last scale of the tail too, because that's probably also a little bit above the tip. So I'm going to speed up again, because I'm now gonna draw the rest of the back and the wings of the dragon. So this video was about the scales, so I might as well speed this up. I'm just adding shadows and the texture of the back, the little sewing lines around the top, and the handles. And well, this was a very old bag. As you can see, the handles are very torn and worn. And the thing is, I wanted to draw a dragon, and most of the time while I was working on this drawing, I was actually drawing the bag. So I think only 40% of the time I was actually drawing the dragon, and the rest of the time I was drawing the bag. But okay, the bag looks pretty cool too, so at least I know I can draw bags. I'm starting to add a top layer on the dragon here, and I'm doing that with a light pencil, and I'm putting a lot of pressure on it, so I can really press all the colors in the paper, blend them together, and get a really cool effect. I'm also adding some bright yellow now, because it was supposed to be a fire dragon and it wasn't really fiery yet. So with the yellow and the orange, I make it, well, it's a fire dragon. It's more exciting to look at like this. It was a little gray brownish, and now it's really cool. It has a cool color, or actually very warm color, but whatever. So I'm also going in with the black pencil again, adding some more shadows after I burnished, as they call it, when you put a lot of pressure on the pencil to finish the piece. But because of doing that, the shadows were a little faded, so I'm going back in with a black pencil to fix those shadows, because shadows are the most important part. It's really the thing that makes the drawing look 3D. If you don't have any dark shadows, then it's just going to look flat and uninteresting. So back in with the luminance pencil to make the shadows really, really dark. And again, one scale after the other, working my way around all the scales, the entire dragon. And to finish it off, I am making some highlights with my white gel marker, which is really useful to have. So this is the final result. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. You can also subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos like this in the future. And if you want to see more of my work, please check out my Instagram account, which I link to below in the description. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Bye bye!